The 4 words that cost a father everything. Hold on. Before you dive into this gut-wrenching tale of betrayal and redemption, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support means the world. The night the future died, she remembered every detail of that night, as if it were etched into her soul. The city lights outside the tall windows of Julian Sterling's luxurious Chicago penthouse looked like scattered stars, so close she could almost touch them. Avery Hayes had dreamed of a future by his side. She believed they were building something real, something worth the sacrifices she had made. She stood there, nervous but hopeful, her fingers gently resting on her lower abdomen, knowing she carried a life that was half his and half hers. She imagined his reaction, the joy and surprise lighting up those piercing blue eyes. That fantasy died the moment he walked in. Julian Sterling, one of the youngest and most intimidating CEOs in the tech industry, was a man carved from ice and ambition. Everything about him was sharp, controlled, untouchable. That night, he seemed even more distant than usual, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched, as if he'd made a decision he couldn't take back. When he finally lifted his gaze to her, there was no tenderness left in it. He spoke the words softly, without anger, which only made them cut deeper. "I never loved you." Simple words that shattered every belief Avery had clung to. She stared at him, waiting for any sign that this was a cruel joke, that he was pushing her away out of fear and not truth. She thought about telling him she was pregnant, about reminding him of every tender moment they once shared. Instead, she saw the undeniable indifference where his love used to be. The pain was too raw, too humiliating, and she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She managed only a single nod, a small acknowledgement that she had understood. She turned and walked to the elevator, her fingers trembling as she pressed the button. Behind her, Julian remained silent, a statue of power and indifference, watching the woman he should have fought for walk away without a word. The doors closed between them, and Avery felt something inside her shut down forever. 3 miracles. Triple the fear. Stepping out into the cold night air, the first tear escaped despite her efforts. She clutched her coat tighter, a protective hand instinctively covering her flat belly. She promised the tiny life inside her that she would give it everything, even if she had nothing left to give. A few months later, Avery's life changed drastically. Not once, but 3 times over. Her pregnancy progressed faster than she was ready for, and the biggest shock came during her ultrasound. The technician, wide-eyed with disbelief, turned the screen toward her, pointing at 3 small shapes. 3 babies, 3 lips, fluttering wildly like butterflies. Identical triplets. Avery left the clinic with legs trembling, realizing her life had just become 3 times more beautiful and 3 times more terrifying. She pushed her body past its limits to pay for food and medical checkups, working 3 exhausting jobs. She cleaned offices before dawn, waited tables for long shifts, and sewed handcrafted items late into the night. Her back ached constantly, her feet swelled, and there were nights she cried herself to sleep because she didn't know how she would manage tomorrow. Yet every time she felt 3 strong kicks inside her, she reminded herself of her promise. She would keep fighting. On the day they were born, Ethan, Owen, and Noah, the delivery room erupted into controlled chaos. One after another, her sons entered the world with loud cries. All 3 were fair-haired. All 3 had strikingly blue eyes, each one a perfect, undeniable mirror of Julian Sterling. Avery held them for the first time, tears streaming down her cheeks. They were so tiny, yet they made her world feel vast and full of hope. Raising 3 infants alone was a challenge no one could have prepared her for. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Nights blurred into days filled with feeding, changing, and rocking her babies until her arms ached. She moved through life like someone underwater, exhausted, but relentlessly moving forward. Avery chose not to tell Julian about the triplets, sacrificing her own ease for their safety and dignity. Do you agree with her decision, or should she have told him immediately? Share your thoughts below. The empty empire. Meanwhile, Julian Sterling externally had everything a man could want. His name graced financial magazines, and his company's success constantly fueled his ego. He had built a life surrounded by glass and steel, but nothing warm or human seemed to survive in it. He told himself that solitude was strength. He convinced himself that attachments were distractions. For 3 years, he survived on that belief until small cracks began to appear in the walls around his heart. He couldn't fully bury the memories of Avery. A laugh that sounded like hers would squeeze his chest. A subtle perfume would drown his mind in flashes of what he had thrown away. In business events, he was surrounded by beautiful women, but none of them possessed the genuine warmth that once illuminated his world with a single smile. He tried to ignore the emptiness, but it became unbearable. One rainy afternoon, a small photograph slipped from an old file. It was the only photo he had of her. Avery sitting in a park, laughing, the sunlight catching her brown eyes. She looked alive, free, everything he was not. It was then that the truth he had been avoiding finally swelled inside him. He loved her. He always had. His denial, his pride, his obsession with power had blinded him. He realized his biggest failure was not in the boardroom, but in letting her walk out that door. He tried to find her discreetly, hiring private investigators. Every dead end twisted the knife deeper. He had no idea that she had carried with her a secret far larger than heartbreak. He didn't know that just a few miles away, 3 little boys were growing up every day, each one with his face and his eyes. The most important part of his story was living completely outside his knowledge. The silent crisis Avery had always known that raising 3 children alone would demand every ounce of strength she possessed. But she never realized how fragile a human body could be when pushed past its limits. For 3 years, she survived on minimal sleep, cheap instant meals, constant worry over bills, and a heart that never fully healed. She ignored the dizziness and the sharp pains that shot through her sides. The truth she tried to outrun finally caught her. One afternoon, while preparing lunch, her hands began to tremble so violently the spoon slipped. The room spun, and an unbearable pressure tightened around her chest. She collapsed on the kitchen floor, hearing the terrified screams of her sons as their little feet ran toward her. The hospital room smelled of sterile chemicals and fear. The doctor explained her health had been deteriorating for a long time. Severe anemia, cardiac strain, malnutrition. Her body was breaking because she had given everything to her children and saved nothing for herself. The doctors warned her that without costly treatment and recovery time, she would only get worse. Her heart might not withstand another collapse. Avery stared at the medical bills piled at the foot of her bed. The system didn't reward people who never stopped trying. It only punished them for not sinking low enough to qualify for assistance. She knew she couldn't afford the treatment. She looked at her 3 little boys, now sleeping huddled together in chairs near her bed, their faces identical, peaceful, and innocent. She felt a profound, aching love that hurt more than any illness. They deserved a mother who would be there to watch them grow. Her trembling fingers picked up a pen. A blank sheet of paper stared back at her with cruel simplicity. Her heart pounded with dread, but she forced herself to write. She told Julian Sterling that he had children, 3 sons, perfect in ways he couldn't imagine. She wrote that she wasn't asking him to love her, or even them, but that the boys deserved to have a mother, and she needed his help to stay alive for them. She sealed the letter before she could change her mind. She walked slowly to the mailbox outside the hospital and slid the envelope inside. Her final plea disappeared into the dark chute, heading toward the man who once claimed he never loved her, and who never knew he had abandoned something more than just a woman. The unimaginable reflection. Julian received the letter on a quiet afternoon, its trembling handwriting making something flicker in his chest. The first sentence hit him like a lightning bolt. Skylar, 3 sons. His sons. His breath violently caught in his throat as he scanned every heartbreaking line. She wasn't demanding anything. She was simply pleading for the chance to live long enough to raise the children he never knew existed. His vision blurred. His pulse hammered in his ears. He barely remembered grabbing his coat and ordering his driver to find the hospital. The drive felt endless. What if he was too late? The guilt clawed at his throat until he could barely breathe. When he arrived at the hospital, he almost ran to the reception desk, his voice trembling as he asked for Avery's room. As he walked down the corridor, soft, clumsy, high-pitched laughter made him slow down. He turned toward the sound, and his heart stopped. 3 little boys were sitting on the floor near their mother's room door, playing with colorful blocks, oblivious to his arrival. Julian stared at them, trying to grasp the impossible. They were identical, each with silky fair hair as pale as his had been at their age, and eyes so blue they could have been reflections of his own. They were his mirror image, divided into 3. The realization hit him so hard, he leaned against the wall, terrified he might collapse under the weight of it. These boys had grown for 3 years without the love, protection, or presence of the father who should have been there from the start. One of the boys, the most serious-looking one, noticed him first. Their eyes met, and the boy tilted his head in confused curiosity before timidly summoning his brothers closer. Slowly, all 3 turned to look at Julian. In that instant, everything he had ever valued or believed about himself crumbled. The man who once said, "I never loved you," now knew he had not only hurt a woman, but irrevocably failed 3 innocent lives. Julian dropped to his knees so as not to tower over them, a desperate effort to connect with the world he was now an intruder in. Ethan, the brave one, took a small step forward. Owen followed with cautious curiosity, while Noah clung to his brothers, looking up with uncertainty. Julian's throat painfully tightened as he extended a hand, afraid to even touch them. He wished he could go back in time. He wished he could unsay the words he spoke to their mother. The door behind them opened slightly, and Avery stood in the doorway, still in her hospital gown, pale but fierce, in the way only a mother fighting for her children can be. Their eyes met for the first time in 3 years, and the silence that filled the hallway was heavy with everything they never said. Julian slowly rose, terrified that one false move might break her completely. He took a single step closer. Avery's voice, when it finally came, was weary and guarded. She reminded him that she hadn't come for forgiveness or a second chance, but because her sons deserved to keep their mother, and she no longer had a way to guarantee that alone. Julian looked back at the boys, now clinging to her gown, looking at him with the same eyes that haunted his reflection every morning. For the first time in his life, his priorities aligned with absolute clarity. He wanted to protect them. He wanted to save her. He wanted to earn the right to be a part of their lives. He promised Avery he would take responsibility, that he would secure her the best treatment available, and that he would never leave again. She didn't believe him yet, and he couldn't expect her to. Trust wasn't something he could ask for. It was something he would have to rebuild from nothing. As Avery guided the boys back into her room, Julian watched them with a sense of awe and overwhelming sorrow. He whispered a vow so softly no one else could hear. He swore he would learn to be a father. He swore he would never again walk away from the family he almost destroyed. Julian has finally met his sons. Do you think a man who rejected love can truly change, Or is this just a desperate fix for his guilt? Let your opinion be heard in the comments. Ready for the next chapter? We will dive into Julian's transformation from CEO to overwhelmed single father. Part 2. The CEO's New Job. Chaos and Cribs. Before we dive into Julian's hilarious and humbling journey into fatherhood, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. Let's show the world that second chances are worth fighting for. The invasion of the Sterling penthouse. Julian moved Avery and the triplets, Ethan, Owen, and Noah, into his high-rise Chicago penthouse within days, refusing to entertain any argument. The doctors had insisted on a long recovery period, and he was determined to remove Avery from a life that was slowly killing her. His penthouse, once a cold monument to wealth and ego, transformed overnight into something else entirely. Toys sprawled across the polished marble floors, tiny socks were draped over designer furniture, and giggles echoed through halls that were once silent. The chaos was overwhelming, yet he found he didn't hate it. He just didn't know how to navigate it. Julian quickly discovered that children didn't care if you were a CEO or a janitor. They only cared if you could tie their shoes correctly or read their favorite book in a silly voice. In the beginning, the boys kept their emotional distance. Ethan observed him with wariness, trying to measure if he was a friend or a threat. Owen watched with thoughtful eyes, trying to solve the enigma of a father who had suddenly appeared from nowhere. Noah clung to Avery, hiding behind her whenever Julian came too close. It hurt more than he expected. He knew he had no right to feel wounded after missing 3 years of their lives, but the emotional distance from his own sons carved painful marks inside him. He decided he would earn every step they took toward him, one clumsy effort at a time. Board meetings versus bath time learning was nothing like running a business. In meetings, he commanded respect with a glare. But with toddlers, he found himself kneeling on the floor, surrounded by spilled juice, assembling complicated toys with missing instructions, or trying to calm 3 simultaneous tantrums that made any corporate crisis feel manageable. He failed constantly. He burned breakfast, put diapers on backward, and misinterpreted their cues so often that the boys looked at him as if he were a malfunctioning robot. The first time he attempted bath time alone, the bathroom became a complete flood zone, with soap bubbles floating up to the chandelier as 3 giggling, dripping boys streaked naked down the hall. Julian stood, soaked, wondering how someone with an Ivy League education could be so utterly defeated by small children. Yet every disaster taught him something. Slowly, the boys started looking for his help instead of avoiding him. They allowed him to sit with them during meals and drifted to sleep on his lap when they were too tired to resist. The first night that happened, Noah snuggled against his chest, while Ethan and Owen shared his arm as a pillow. Julian remained perfectly still for hours. The weight of their trust felt like the highest honor he had ever received. His heart ached with regret, but also filled with a new, quiet, unconditional love. If you were Julian, what's the one baby-related task you would hire someone else to do? No questions asked. Changing diapers, bath time, or preparing baby food? Tell us your answer. Avery's silent assessment. From a distance, Avery watched in silence. As she slowly recovered, she learned to surrender responsibility bit by bit, though relinquishing control was harder for her than any physical therapy. She saw Julian's once impeccable appearance become rumpled by sticky hands, and she noted the exhaustion that settled under his eyes when he woke every time one of the boys cried at night. He didn't complain. He just showed up, day after day, even when the boys pushed him away, or when Avery found it hard to meet his gaze. The doctors marveled at her swift improvement once she was surrounded by stability, proper nutrition, and real rest for the first time since she became a mother. The color returned to her cheeks, and her strength grew each week. The terror that once held her captive loosened its grip. She found herself observing Julian in ways she hadn't expected. When he knelt to tie a loose shoelace or gently wiped tears from a scraped knee, she felt an unfamiliar warmth tugging at the guarded walls around her heart. Julian wasn't just struggling with childcare. He was undergoing emotional growth. He secretly attended parenting classes, sitting awkwardly among exhausted single mothers and clueless fathers. He read books on bonding and healthy attachments, highlighting passages that taught him how to undo what he had ruined by being absent for so long. He swore he would become worthy of being called their father. In the quiet hours after everyone was asleep, he would stand by the boys' beds, brushing the hair from their foreheads, memorizing every tiny detail he had missed since the day they were born. The definition of winning. The relationship between Julian and Avery remained fragile, complicated, and layered with years of pain. There were days she barely spoke to him, days when resentment slipped into her voice, and days she wondered if accepting his help was a mistake. Yet there were also moments when she caught him smiling at the boys, his eyes filled with pride and a pang of, "What if?" and she felt her anger soften despite her best efforts. Julian had spent years worshiping success, but now winning meant something entirely different. It wasn't numbers on a stock report or applause from shareholders. It was Owen reaching for his hand without hesitation. It was Ethan calling him Daddy for the first time amidst a game of superheroes. The word, spoken casually, had the power to bring Julian to his knees. It was Noah falling asleep in his arms, trusting him to keep the nightmares at bay. These moments completely rewrote the definition of winning in his mind. His empire once made him feel superior. These children made him feel human. Avery's recovery mirrored the silent healing happening among them all. Their home became a place of laughter, vulnerability, and second chances. And though the deep scars still lingered between Avery and Julian, something greater than their pain began to grow in the spaces where silence used to dominate. Without even realizing it, they were becoming a family. The journey toward forgiveness is never easy. Avery still carries the pain of his rejection. Julian is trying hard to be consistent. Do you think Julian has fully changed, or is he simply motivated by guilt? Share your honest opinion in the comments. Ready for the next stage? In Part 3, we will see Julian make a major sacrifice to prove his commitment, leading to Avery's final, heartbreaking confession. Madame Monsieur. The ultimate sacrifice. Don't miss the climax of this incredible story. Before we continue, make sure you've subscribed and liked this chapter. Let's get more people to witness Julian's ultimate decision. The constant tension, Julian, had begun to believe that life was finally guiding him in the right direction. Yet, beneath the progress he made, a constant tension persisted that neither he nor Avery dared to ignore. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered and painfully slow to rebuild. Avery's heart still carried the memory of his rejection like a scar that refused to fade. Sometimes, when she looked at him, Julian could see the storm of emotion swirling behind her eyes. Gratitude, fear, resentment, and a flicker of affection she desperately tried to deny. He knew she questioned his every move, waiting to see if this version of him was temporary or real. This knowledge weighed heavily on him, pushing him to work harder not just for his sons, but for her forgiveness, even though he feared he might never earn it. One night, after her rehabilitation exercises were done and the boys were asleep, Avery sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, her body stronger, but her spirit still healing. She stared at the city lights, a mix of awe and caution, trying to absorb the reality that her world had shifted so drastically. Julian quietly joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. The silence between them felt more comfortable than usual, yet an invisible line remained that neither was ready to cross. Avery finally spoke, her voice soft but heavy. She told him she didn't want any promises he couldn't keep, and she didn't want her heart broken again, because this time, the boys would break with her. Julian listened without interrupting. He confessed that he didn't expect forgiveness, and that he could barely forgive himself. He admitted he had been a coward who ran from the possibility of love, because love made him vulnerable, and he had spent his life convinced that vulnerability was a flaw. Avery's expression remained unreadable, but her eyes held a mix of hurt and understanding. Julian vowed that he would spend every day proving he was no longer that man, that he would give up everything he had built if it meant protecting the family right in front of him. "Actions matter more than pretty words, Julian," she said. He nodded. "No, and you are." The CEO steps down. From that moment on, Julian focused even more intensely on showing change rather than just talking about it. He completely reshuffled his priorities. The company executives were stunned when he announced he was resigning from his position as CEO. Shareholders protested, friends called him reckless, and the media speculated endlessly. But none of it mattered. He had spent years pursuing power, but power never filled the void that love had left behind. Trading his title for the chance to fix what he broke felt less like a sacrifice and more like a release. Quitting gave him something he'd never felt before: time. He learned to braid hair for the first time when Ethan insisted that superhero capes looked better with styled hair. He took Owen to a science museum and spent an entire afternoon answering curious questions that made him laugh harder than he ever did in a boardroom. He carried Noah through the house when nightmares woke the boy up crying, whispering comfort as he rocked him back to sleep. Each small moment was an act of healing, one that stitched his family together with an invisible thread. Avery noticed it all, though she tried not to show how deeply it affected her. She saw his once impeccable suit replaced by clothes rumpled by sticky fingers, and she saw the determination in his growth. Julian even attended therapy, confronting a counselor about his deep-seated fear of intimacy and his mistaken belief that emotions made a person weak. He realized he had been molded into someone who believed love was a liability. Every session stripped away more of the armor he had spent years forging, leaving a man who could finally feel without running away. The unspoken pain. Very's heart remained cautious, but day after day, she saw sincerity in his efforts. She saw how his eyes lit up when the boys called him Daddy, and how his hands always reached out to catch them if they stumbled. Yet, the healing was not a simple upward climb. There were nights Avery woke from nightmares, hearing his voice ring out, "I never loved you," just as clearly as the night he first said it. She would pull away from him, hugging herself, doubting everything again. Julian learned to give her space in those moments, but it hurt him to see how profoundly he had damaged her. When she finally confessed one night that she still feared waking up alone again, he promised, gently, that he would always remain within reach. That night, he slept in a chair near her bed, not touching her, but refusing to leave her side. When she opened her eyes in the morning and saw him still there, the catch in her breath revealed how much that simple choice meant. The toughest truth remained unspoken until a quiet afternoon, when fear finally forced her to name it. Avery confessed that a part of her would always remember what he said the night he sent her away, and that no matter how much he changed, a shadow of that pain might linger forever. Julian didn't try to erase it. Instead, he told her he would live his life proving that the man she knew now was the real one, the one who never again would confuse love with a weakness. He promised to earn every piece of trust she chose to give him. The breakthrough. Julian had meticulously planned this day. He wanted every second to reflect the love he could finally recognize, without doubt. A year of rebuilding their lives had transformed them all. He chose a quiet park for their family picnic. The sky was clear, and the air smelled of fresh grass and blooming flowers. Ethan, Owen, and Noah ran off to chase butterflies. As they watched the boys play, Julian found himself studying Avery, memorizing the sweetness of her expression and the relaxed curve of her shoulders. He waited until the boys were distracted by a pile of leaves and sticks that had magically become pirate treasure. And then he stood up slowly, his hands trembling slightly. Avery looked up, perplexed. Julian reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small box he had carried for weeks. His voice faltered as he began to speak, not with a rehearsed, eloquent speech, but with a raw sincerity that came directly from the place he once hid from everyone, including himself. He told her he had built empires and chased greatness, but none of it felt complete until he became part of a family with her and their sons. He admitted he could never erase the pain he caused, but he could promise that every day forward would be dedicated to the love, patience, and protection of the life they built together. The boys noticed the sudden stillness and turned to watch, surprise widening their bright blue eyes. Julian knelt down on one knee, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. He extended the ring box with a trembling hand and asked Avery to marry him, his voice barely a whisper, but filled with hope that resonated louder than any word he had ever spoken. For one breathless moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Avery covered her mouth with her hands as tears gathered, the kind that belonged not to heartbreak, but to the healing that had finally reached its completion. She remembered everything. The night he rejected her, the years of fear and struggle, the quiet transformation she witnessed day by day. But she also saw the man kneeling before her now, a man who chose love over pride, a man who fought to win back her trust and their future. Her tears spilled freely as she brought her hands down, and she nodded, her voice barely steady as she whispered, "Yes." The boys erupted in shrieks of joy and ran towards them, tackling their father before he could even stand up, bringing him down in a heap of laughter and excitement. Julian laughed, wrapping his arms around the children, overwhelmed by the tide of love that crashed over him. Avery joined the pile a second later, and somehow, they all ended up hugging in a tangled mess of arms and laughter, the kind of moment that felt too perfect to belong to reality. As they sat together afterward, Julian slipped the ring onto Avery's finger, while the boys leaned against them, exhausted by the celebration. Avery rested her head on his shoulder, finally allowing herself to lean on him, unafraid that he would vanish. Julian pressed a soft kiss to her hair, silently promising that this was the start of a life he would honor with everything he had. The cold CEO had sought control and found isolation. The humbled father had sought connection and found his heart's true, priceless empire. What a breathtaking moment. If you were moved by Julian's powerful choice, please 1. Subscribe to the Sterling Stories. 2. Like this video. 3. Comment below. Where should Julian and Avery get married? On the beach in Lakeview, or in a grand cathedral in Chicago? Part 4. The Unbreakable Empire. This is the final chapter of Julian and Avery's incredible journey. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video to celebrate their new beginning. The choice of home. Following the emotional proposal, Julian and Avery faced their next major decision: their wedding and their future home. Julian, with his newfound humility, sold the gleaming, soulless penthouse in Chicago. He no longer needed a monument to his ego. He needed a foundation for his family. They chose to settle permanently in the quaint, warm community of Lakeview, a quiet lakeside town that reminded Avery of the resilience she had built during her years of struggle. They bought a beautiful, slightly ramshackle house near the water, a house that needed care, attention, and love to become a true home. Julian dedicated his massive resources and time not to starting a new company, but to investing in the community. He used his business sense to fund and manage local revitalization projects, focusing on building affordable daycare centers and improving healthcare access, the very things Avery had struggled to afford. The Iceman CEO had become the town's unlikely champion. Avery watched, no longer with suspicion, but with profound love. She was no longer battling fear. She was building trust. If Julian had to choose a new career now, should he become a full-time community developer, or should he open a small, independent business in Lakeview? Vote in the comments. The Lakeview wedding, a year after the proposal, Julian and Avery gathered their small circle for a wedding on the shores of Lakeview. It was an intimate affair, deliberately small, centering entirely on the commitment to their family. Avery, radiant in a simple, elegant gown, walked down the aisle. Not with her father, but flanked by her 3 5-year-old triplet ring-bearers: Ethan, the brave and focused one; Owen, the thoughtful and cautious one; and Noah, the most affectionate. Julian stood waiting, looking back at his life. The ruthless ambition, the lonely success, the cruel mistake, and the painstaking journey back. He saw the genuine, fierce love in Avery's eyes, and he knew he had won the only battle that ever truly mattered. The sight of their boys, dressed in tiny suits, attempting to walk a straight line while carrying a ring cushion, nearly brought Julian to tears. During the vows, Julian spoke directly to Avery, his voice thick with emotion. "Avery, the night I let you walk away, I chose an illusion of power over the reality of love. I broke you, and I broke myself. I can never take those 4 words back. But I promise you this: every single day for the rest of my life will be my apology. I vow to always look for the laughter first, to always put our boys before my pride, and to never, ever confuse love with weakness again." Avery's response was a silent promise of her own. "Julian," she said, her voice trembling, "I forgive you, not because you earned it instantly, but because you stayed. You fought for us when I was too weak to fight for myself. You didn't just rebuild my body, you rebuilt my belief. You are not the man who left me. You are the home who came back." The unbreakable empire. The small, simple ceremony was sealed with a kiss and the joyous, chaotic embrace of the 3 boys, who immediately climbed onto their parents, making the solemn moment perfectly messy and real. Their life together was not without challenges. The scars of the past remained, surfacing occasionally in a moment of doubt or a flicker of old fear. But now, they faced them together. Julian helped Avery confront her moments of anxiety, and Avery helped Julian stay connected to the human world, grounding him with a gentle reminder of why he stepped down from his empire. Julian often looked at his triplets, 3 perfect, blue-eyed reminders of his greatest failure and his greatest fortune. He discovered that the empire of Sterling Tech was a fragile structure of glass and numbers that could be toppled by a single bad quarter. But the empire of Hayes Sterling, built on sacrifice, forgiveness, 3 sticky-fingered boys, and a woman's fierce love, was an unbreakable force. He realized his entire life had been a search for the strength to stand alone. He finally found that true, immeasurable strength lay in the courage to kneel, the honesty to confess, and the unconditional love of the family he chose to come home to. This was his true success. This was his true victory. The journey of Julian and Avery teaches us that the best love stories are not about finding perfection, but about embracing the beautiful mess of second chances. Thank you for following their story. Final call to action. Please give this entire video a huge like and comment below. What meaningful advice would you give Julian and Avery for raising their 3 beautiful boys?